Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern. We heard today that you're changing your phone number. Is it the Prime Ministerial equivalent of a Facebook friend cult?
Just wondering whether or not I'll still be allowed to text you about baby-related issues.
Yes.
As Prime Minister, you buy everyone in New Zealand a Christmas present.
I have them all distributed via Santa, though.
Good answer.
Smooth.
Prime Minister, we really appreciate you making some time for us.
I once made fun of what I thought was a sycophantic interview on The Project.
Speak truth to power and give power to the truth.
Hold that thought.
It's been a tough month for the Prime Minister, with political pressure, polls and protests that will no doubt go down in history. Even perhaps making its way into the classroom.
Okay, come on. I think that song is about somebody's baby, but of course it works in other ways, and I can't know for sure in what context the school people performed it, but going by the news report, this is blimmin' weird, isn't it? The PM comes to visit, and everybody sings, "Isn't she lovely?" I was just making a joke, but now this is normal?
People stuck at home are being bombarded with misinformation.
Becoming more violent, extreme, misogynistic and racist.
News doesn't get too specific about what the disinformation actually is.
Jacinda Ardern says she's seen increased anger at her online.
Criticism of the PM is the only thing they mention. To be clear, that question and all that footage is from 2021 and things were less heavy then. The answer to my question before, though, is misinformation criticism of the PM. I think it's slowly but surely being clarified now. 16 March. This opinion piece, originating at theconversation.com, was all over the place. Multiple other outlets ran it also. Some adjusted the headline a little bit, but it's all the same on the inside. So it shouldn't be too hard to find if you want to read it and assess it for yourself. Some of what you learn may shock you. But I'm highlighting this particular paragraph here, stating,
false claims that Ardern is a tyrant or a dictator have been increasingly commonplace.
So that's a false claim. You can't say tyrant or dictator. You can call your parent a tyrant. Your boss can be a tyrant. A wild animal doesn't know any better. You call them a tyrant, even king of the tyrants. But it takes a truly sophisticated society to criminalize calling the leader a tyrant. I mean, if they were democratically elected, right? Of course, it's not quite criminal yet, but sometimes you can joke about seemingly ridiculous possibilities, and then they end up coming true, so who knows? Perhaps that sort of criticism, calling one a tyrant, won't come under the umbrella of hate speech, though possibly under the umbrella of misinformation. If some people got their way, misinformation could become a subcategory of general blasphemy anyway. Everything under one big umbrella. Yeah, I'd be less not okay with it if we saw fewer of those occasional things being debunked originally, but then undebunked later, with no accountability from people who were so arrogant about it. And maybe I'm getting off track, just that when there's a media blitz telling people not to call the leader a tyrant or a dictator because it's categorically false, the word false might be more dangerous to use than tyrant or dictator. It was labelled opinion analysis, sure, but the article was so ubiquitous, probably had more persuasive power than your typical letter to the editor.
Did you see this, Bernice? Oh my.
And I think with more and more people thinking in terms of what's false versus what's not false, this haphazard war on misinformation will probably keep escalating.
How much of an impact will that protest have had on misinformation and its spread now?
It's not going to go away. People have gone down rabbit holes and they're going to stay down rabbit holes. And so I'm not sure what the answer to your question is.
Language reform seems to be on hold right now. And it's times like these, you want a government that can't deliver. Meanwhile, though, I think the only people that wanted that law in the first place are growing even less tolerant, perhaps, to information they don't want to hear.
The violence and vitriol of the recent protests outside Parliament, with elements of far-right hate, with signs of white supremacy, taking advantage of disillusion, grifting disinformation, is a perfect example of that. The Royal Commission told us we need hate speech laws.
If they ever do get what they want, the leader who enacts it would well and truly transform right then and there into a tyrant or dictator if they weren't one already.
Liberty is meaningless where the right to utter one's thoughts and opinions has ceased to exist. That, of all rights, is the dread of tyrants.
So maybe I'm speculating, but if amateur internet commentary is anything to go by, even if it occasionally crosses over with satire, then we should surely all be worried.
The party was proud of what it referred to as re-education through labour.
Sustained propaganda.
Our
awesome Prime Minister?
The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern.
Someone who's very important here in New Zealand, the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern.
Thank you so much, Prime Minister.
Our wonderful Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern.
Jacinda Ardern is doing an amazing job. Totally agree with that, you're so right.
Jacinda Ardern, thanks so much for your time.
I think with more and more people thinking in terms of what's false versus what's not false, you can joke about seemingly ridiculous possibilities and then they end up coming true. How we all long for a simpler time. Every tyrannosaur is a king. Look to their character. Judge them by their character.